It began with a laugh. Not the kind of laugh you hear when joy fills a room, but the sharp, cruel kind that slices through air like broken glass. In a ballroom filled with chandeliers, silk gowns, and billion-dollar deals, that laugh was followed by something even more humiliating, something no one expected. A cake. Smashed. Right across the face of a black woman who had done nothing more than show up. The room froze. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but silence weighed heavier than justice. Cameras didn't flash, security didn't move, because when the one holding the cake is the heiress, the rules bend, and the shame lingers. But here's what no one in that glittering hall knew: humiliation was not the end of this story. In fact, it was only the beginning. The victim did not cry. She did not scream. She did not even wipe the frosting from her face. Instead, she stood still, calm, with eyes that held the weight of storms. Eyes that carried history, of being overlooked, disrespected, dismissed. But also eyes that carried power. Because just minutes later, that very same heiress, the woman laughing, basking in the cruelty of her stunt, would watch everything she valued slip through her hands. Not her gown. Not her reputation. But something far larger, something she never thought could be touched. A contract. A deal. A $4 billion empire built on arrogance and old money. And all of it, gone. What could possibly happen in those few minutes between a public humiliation and the collapse of an empire? How could a single moment of cruelty unravel years of wealth, connections, and privilege? And who, exactly, was the woman with frosting on her face, the woman the heiress thought was powerless? This is not just a story about a cake. It's a story about arrogance meeting its downfall. About silence that turns into strength. And about how racism, even dressed in diamonds and gowns, can crumble when confronted with unexpected power. Because sometimes, the most devastating revenge doesn't come in screams or fists, it comes in silence, in strategy, and in the quiet destruction of everything your oppressor thought was untouchable. So the question is, when the heiress laughed, did she realize that laugh would echo into the ruin of her entire fortune? Stay with me. Because what happened next would leave the entire gala, and the entire city, stunned. Before that night, before the chandeliers, the gowns, and the cake, she lived a life that many might overlook at first glance. Her name was Danielle Rivers. To most, she was just another guest on the invitation list, a face in a crowd of wealthy elites. But beneath the surface, Danielle was far more than that. She was a woman who had built her name not through inheritance, but through relentless determination. Danielle grew up in a neighborhood where success wasn't handed to anyone. Her mother worked double shifts as a nurse, her father long hours at a shipping yard. Money was tight, but discipline wasn't. They raised her to believe that education could be a weapon, that dignity was worth more than gold, and that silence in the face of disrespect was never an option. By her late 30s, Danielle had climbed to a place that very few imagined for her. She wasn't a billionaire, no. But she had become a respected negotiator, a business strategist trusted by some of the largest corporations in the country. When companies reached billion-dollar crossroads, she was the one called in to shape the outcome. Her reputation wasn't built on charm or connections, but on skill, grit, and a calm presence that made even her rivals listen. That night, she didn't walk into the gala as a stranger. She walked in as the unseen force behind one of the largest contracts on the table, a deal worth $4 billion, one that would reshape entire industries. Her seat at that ballroom wasn't luck. It was earned. Still, in spaces like those, Danielle knew how she was often seen. She wasn't just a woman. She wasn't just an outsider among the wealthy heirs and heiresses who'd grown up in velvet privilege. She was a black woman. And no matter how many contracts she had secured, no matter how many boardrooms she had commanded, she understood the glances, the whispers, the careful exclusion. They dressed their prejudice in politeness, in fake smiles, in compliments laced with condescension. Yet Danielle wore her composure like armor. Her dress that night wasn't chosen to impress but to signal strength, deep emerald green, elegant, sharp-lined, commanding. She entered the hall not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who had already carved her place into the room, whether they liked it or not. The gala itself was a performance, an annual spectacle where fortunes met over champagne and whispered deals. Chandeliers glittered like frozen fire, string music floated through the air, and every conversation buzzed with talk of mergers, empires, and expansions. It was the kind of room where appearances mattered more than truths, where reputations could be destroyed in a single headline, or built in a single handshake. And yet, beneath the polished surface, Danielle felt the tension. She could sense the unease from some of the heirs who saw her as a threat. Not because she was unworthy, but because she wasn't supposed to be there. To them, influence was something you inherited, not something you earned. They could not imagine that someone who didn't look like them, didn't come from their world, could be the key to sealing, or breaking, a deal of this magnitude. Among them was Victoria Haldane, the heiress whose name alone carried weight. She had been raised in privilege so immense it was practically invisible to her. To Victoria, the world bent without resistance. People didn't tell her no. She was used to control, to deference, to admiration that felt automatic. And in that ballroom, she expected to be the brightest star. But that night, for the first time, her spotlight dimmed. Whispers were circulating, not about Victoria, but about Danielle. Investors spoke of how the strategist held the final word on a contract worth billions. It wasn't Victoria's charm or name that would decide the future of the deal. It was Danielle's signature. Victoria noticed. And she did not like it. Danielle felt the shift without needing to hear the words. She saw the sidelong glances, the forced smiles that tightened around the edges of champagne glasses. She knew the rules of these rooms. The more powerful she was, the more someone would test her dignity. She didn't know how, or when, but she could feel it coming. And that's where the story turns. Because Danielle had been underestimated before. She had endured slights, insults, and the quiet racism that tried to erase her worth. But what was about to happen that night would not be subtle. It would be loud. Public. Humiliating. Still, what no one in that ballroom realized was this: Danielle wasn't just a guest. She wasn't just another name on the list. She was holding the strings of a $4 billion decision. And when arrogance collided with her resolve, the fallout would be nothing short of catastrophic. The gala shimmered like a stage, but beneath the glow of chandeliers, the cracks in its polished facade began to show. Danielle moved through the room with practiced composure, shaking hands, exchanging quiet words with investors, listening more than she spoke. It was how she commanded respect, through presence, not volume. But across the ballroom, Victoria Haldane watched. The heiress's smile was painted on, her laughter a little too sharp, her eyes following Danielle like a shadow. At first, her irritation was subtle, an arched brow here, a dismissive comment there. But as the night unfolded, her mask began to slip. Danielle felt it. Each time Victoria swept past, her perfume lingering, her gaze narrowed just slightly. She could hear the soft whispers at the edges of conversations, remarks that seemed harmless to outsiders but cut deep with implication. "She's ambitious, isn't she?" someone muttered, as though ambition in a black woman was arrogance, not drive. "Surprising she's here at all," another voice whispered. Danielle didn't flinch. She was used to this, polite racism dressed in silk gloves. She met their stares with steady eyes, offering no reaction, no satisfaction. But the tension was rising, and she could sense that Victoria wasn't finished. The deal looming over the night only made things sharper. Everyone knew that Danielle had been entrusted with final approval. That knowledge tilted the balance of power in ways Victoria couldn't stomach. In Victoria's world, heiresses weren't supposed to be outshined, especially not by someone who didn't carry her name, her lineage, or her skin. So the heiress began to push. First, with sly remarks designed to wound. She raised her glass and, with a smile too sweet, commented loudly about new money finding its way into places it didn't belong. Her friends giggled, their laughter rippling like broken glass. Danielle kept her poise, choosing silence over reaction, but inside, her heart drummed. Then came the exclusion. Groups closed just slightly as she approached, conversations shifted abruptly, introductions skipped her name. It was the kind of invisible wall that black professionals knew too well, doors closing not with locks, but with polite smiles. Still, Danielle stood firm. She had weathered worse. She reminded herself that her presence alone was resistance, her success proof that she couldn't be erased. But as the night stretched on, Victoria's patience snapped. It happened at the peak of the evening, when the music swelled and waiters carried out desserts so delicate they looked like art. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the heiress, glowing under the spotlight, took center stage with her circle of admirers. And then, without warning, Victoria turned her cruelty into theater. She picked up a slice of cake, rich and frosted, and with a smirk curling at her lips, she walked straight toward Danielle. The room seemed to pause, the air heavy with anticipation, though no one quite knew why. Danielle stood near the edge of the dance floor, unaware of the spectacle about to unfold. In one swift, deliberate motion, Victoria smashed the cake into her face. Laughter erupted, not from everyone, but from enough voices to make the sting deeper. The room buzzed with shock, gasps blending with cruel chuckles. Danielle's breath caught, frosting cold against her skin, humiliation burning hotter than fire. The room spun, every gaze drilling into her. She heard whispers, "Oh my God. Did she really? And she deserved it, didn't she?" The casual cruelty of people too afraid to oppose the heiress, too entertained to show decency. For a moment, time fractured. Danielle could feel the old, familiar weight, the world pressing her down, telling her to shrink, to disappear. It was the same weight she'd felt as a child when teachers doubted her, as a young professional when colleagues dismissed her ideas, as a woman told over and over that she didn't belong. But then, something shifted. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply lifted her chin, frosting dripping from her face, her eyes locking on Victoria with a calm so sharp it silenced the laughter. Because Danielle knew something that no one else in that room truly understood. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it strikes in silence. And while Victoria reveled in her moment of cruelty, Danielle held the one thing the heiress could never touch, the final decision over a $4 billion contract. The humiliation burned, yes. But beneath that burn was something stronger, resolve. The crowd slowly dispersed, laughter turning uneasy, whispers shifting to murmurs. Some guests pretended not to see. Others looked at Danielle with pity, but none stepped forward to defend her. The weight of isolation pressed down heavy, but it did not crush her. It fueled her. Because in that moment, Danielle wasn't thinking about cake. She was thinking about the pen in her purse. The contract waiting for her signature. The billions at stake. And Victoria had no idea. The heiress laughed, basking in her cruelty, blind to the storm she had just unleashed. Around her, her friends cheered, their arrogance blinding them to the tremor already beginning to shake beneath their world. Danielle stood still, silent, a storm in emerald silk. Her humiliation would not be the end of the night. No, the end was coming, and it would be far more devastating than any public stunt. Because within minutes, the balance of power in that room was about to flip, and when it did, the heiress's empire would begin to crumble. But how? How could a single act of arrogance cost billions? And what choice would Danielle make as the world watched? The answers were coming. And the gala was about to witness a downfall no one saw coming. The ballroom had returned to its glittering rhythm, or at least, it pretended to. The orchestra played, glasses clinked, and laughter floated like smoke. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. A cruelty had been committed in the open, and everyone knew it. Danielle stood near the edge of the room, frosting still staining her skin and dress. She hadn't cleaned it off yet, not because she was defeated, but because she refused to erase the evidence of what had just happened. Let them look. Let them see. Let them remember. Victoria Halden, the heiress who had turned humiliation into a game, basked in the glow of her friends' laughter. She twirled her champagne flute, smiling at the sycophants who clapped her on the back, who told her it was just a joke. To her, it was over. To her, she had won. But Danielle knew better. The night was far from over. The contract, the very reason the gala existed, waited in the private lounge, guarded by executives who whispered nervously. Billions rested on its signature, and that signature belonged to Danielle. Every executive in the room knew it. Every investor was watching her. And now, the woman humiliated in public stood with the power to destroy the very empire the heiress believed untouchable. Danielle walked toward the lounge. The crowd parted slightly, uneasily, their eyes following her. Some looked away in shame, others in fear of what she might do. But all of them felt the storm building. Inside, the executives rose to greet her. They avoided mentioning the incident, though the tension in their faces betrayed that they'd seen it all. Danielle said nothing. She simply reached into her purse, pulled out her pen, and set it beside the contract. That was the moment Victoria realized something was wrong. She sauntered into the lounge, her smile still wide, but her voice a little too sharp. "Darling," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "let's not make this bigger than it was. A little fun, a little frosting, surely we can move past it. Don't let emotions cloud a business decision." The executives stiffened. They knew the power dynamics had shifted, and for once, Victoria was not holding the reins. Danielle turned her gaze on the heiress, calm, steady, cutting through the air like glass. And then she spoke, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the measured tone of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. "Emotions don't cloud business decisions," she said. "Arrogance does." The room froze. Victoria's smirk faltered, her eyes flickering in confusion, then irritation. She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand as though to swat away the sting. "Come now. You wouldn't risk a deal this size over Cake. But Danielle didn't look away. She picked up the contract, flipped to the signature page, and let the silence stretch so thin the air itself seemed to tremble. The executives leaned forward, desperate, nervous, waiting. Billions hovered on the tip of her pen. Danielle thought of every slight she had endured, every polite dismissal, every whispered doubt. She thought of the laughter that had rung through the ballroom when Victoria smeared frosting across her face. And she thought of the little girl she once was, the one who had been told she would never sit at these tables, never stand in these rooms, never command this kind of power. Her hand tightened around the pen. And then, slowly, deliberately, she set it down. Unsigned. I will not attach my name, she said, her voice steady, to any agreement that validates disrespect. Power without integrity isn't power, it's rot. The words landed heavier than any shout could have. The executives exchanged glances, panic flickering in their eyes. Billions hung in the balance, and in one motion, Danielle had pulled the thread that unraveled it all. Victoria's face drained of color. Her confidence shattered, her voice cracked as she sputtered, "You can't, you wouldn't dare." But she would. And she did. Danielle stood, frosting still on her face, and walked out of the lounge. Not a tear fell. Not a word more was spoken. The executives scrambled behind her, phones buzzing, whispers erupting like wildfire. The deal was collapsing before their very eyes. Years of planning, billions in projections, reputations, empires, gone. All because of a single act of cruelty, all because one woman underestimated another. In the ballroom, the music still played, but the air had changed. Guests turned their heads as Danielle passed, their gazes a mixture of awe and unease. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. She carried herself with the same composure she had walked in with, only now sharpened by the quiet knowledge of what she had just done. Victoria followed, panic rising in her voice. Wait. You can't leave like this. You don't understand what you've done. But Danielle didn't stop. She crossed the marble floor, frosting still dripping, and pushed through the doors of the gala. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around her like armor. She inhaled deeply, the weight of humiliation replaced by the fire of justice. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown anything. She hadn't begged. She had simply used the very thing Victoria could never understand, her own power. And inside the ballroom, an empire began to collapse. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't come with noise or spectacle. Sometimes, it comes in silence. Sometimes, it comes in a single choice that shatters everything built on arrogance. Danielle didn't need to strike back with cake, or words, or fury. She struck where it hurt most. And the heiress never saw it coming. The deal collapsed. In the days that followed, newspapers and business outlets scrambled to report the fallout. Headlines blared across screens, Halden family deal crumbles overnight. Investors pulled out, stocks dipped, and questions were raised in boardrooms about arrogance, leadership, and the unseen forces that truly hold power. Victoria Halden, once the darling of high society, found herself at the center of a storm she had created with her own hands. What she had thought was a moment of mockery became the spark that burned down her empire's credibility. People whispered not about her wealth or her connections, but about her cruelty, how a single act of racism at a glittering gala cost her billions. And Danielle? She did not celebrate publicly. There were no press conferences, no grand statements. She simply continued her work with the same composure she had carried that night. But within her, something had shifted. She had walked through humiliation and emerged not broken, but stronger. She had proven, to herself, to those who doubted, and to those who watched silently, that dignity can be sharper than any weapon, and silence, when chosen, can roar louder than rage. Yet Danielle knew the story wasn't just hers. Because what happened at that gala wasn't an isolated cruelty. It was a mirror, a reflection of something deeper, something far older than silk gowns and billion-dollar contracts. It was the same racism that has echoed through generations, the quiet dismissal of voices, the public humiliation dressed as jokes, the way society tells black people, over and over, you don't belong here. But here's the truth that night revealed: belonging is not granted by gatekeepers. It's claimed. And once claimed, it cannot be taken away, not by cruelty, not by arrogance, not by cake smashed at a gala. For every Danielle in that ballroom, there are countless others, teachers, doctors, workers, dreamers, who endure humiliation in silence, who fight battles unseen, who walk into rooms where they are doubted, dismissed, or degraded simply for the color of their skin. Most of them don't have a $4 billion contract in their hands. Most don't get the satisfaction of watching an empire fall because of their quiet resistance. But every act of dignity, every refusal to bow, is its own kind of power. And that's what makes Danielle's story more than just a headline. It's a reminder of how fragile privilege can be when it collides with truth. It's proof that even in rooms designed to exclude, strength can stand tall. It's a warning to those who think wealth protects them from consequence, that cruelty carries a cost. The impact rippled beyond the ballroom. Other executives took notice. Contracts were reconsidered. Boards whispered about diversity not as a token, but as a necessity. And in quiet corners, young black professionals who had watched from the sidelines felt something ignite, a sense that maybe, just maybe, dignity could break down doors even louder than outrage. Danielle's silence that night was not weakness. It was strategy. It was the weight of history carried with grace. It was a reminder that racism may dress itself in gowns and chandeliers, but it is still rot, and rot eventually crumbles under its own weight. And for those who laughed that night, for those who stayed silent while cruelty unfolded, her choice left them with a question they could not escape. Where did you stand when injustice played out in front of you? Did you laugh? Did you look away? Or did you find your courage? Because every spectator in that ballroom walked away changed. Some with shame, some with anger, some with awe. And every viewer of this story, every person hearing Danielle's journey, must also walk away with that same question. What do you do when faced with injustice? Do you stay silent and let cruelty pass as entertainment? Or do you stand, even when your voice shakes, even when the world tells you to sit down? Danielle chose to stand in silence, and in doing so, she tore down an empire. Her story isn't just about humiliation turned to power. It's about every person who has ever been told they are less, every person who has ever been underestimated, every person who has ever been silenced. The gala ended, the lights dimmed, and the music faded. But the lesson of that night will echo long after. Dignity has the power to destroy arrogance. So I leave you with this. The next time you witness injustice, will you be the one laughing, the one silent in the crowd, or the one who changes everything with the courage to act? Because sometimes, all it takes is one choice, one voice, one act of dignity, to shake the foundations of power itself.